Tuesday, October 15th, 9:47 a.m. The convoy was traveling down Main Street in downtown Dayton when something unexpected happened at the intersection with 3rd Street. The driver of a truck carrying construction materials failed to notice the red light and crashed into the side of the prison bus. There was a loud screech of metal, screams, and shards of glass on the asphalt. Frank Collins felt his body thrown against the side of the bus. The shackles dug into his wrists, but he didn't pay any attention to them. The moment the guard lost consciousness from hitting his head on the metal partition, Frank knew this was his chance. His only chance in 3 years. He squeezed through the broken window, ignoring the cuts from the glass. The shackles still bound his hands, but amid the chaos of the accident, no one noticed the heavy-set man in prison garb who quickly disappeared into the crowd of onlookers. Detective Sarah Mitchell stood at the window of her office on the 3rd floor of the Dayton Police Department, watching the commotion on the street below. At 38, she had seen enough to know that when a criminal runs, he has a destination. People don't risk their freedom for nothing. Mitchell, we have a fugitive. Sergeant Thomas Riley entered the office with a folder in his hands. Frank Collins, 52 years old, serving time for aggravated assault. Sarah took the file, quickly scanning the key facts. What do we know about the victim? His son, Alex Collins, 24 years old, transgender, a guy who now lives as a woman. Riley said this with a slight discomfort. Collins didn't accept, 3 years ago, he beat his child so badly he had to be hospitalized. Sarah frowned as she studied Frank's photo. A rough face, unshaven stubble, cold gray eyes. Where's the son now? He lives here in Dayton, East Dayton, to be exact. He works as an escort. We've already sent a patrol. Good. I need all the information I can get on Collins. Family, friends, places he might be hiding. And find me his son's address. While the police were setting up a search, Frank had already made his way to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of an industrial area. Here, among rusty containers and graffiti-covered walls, he found a metal rod thin enough to fit between the shackles and his wrist. 10 minutes of painful work, and the handcuffs clicked open. Frank rubbed his wrists raw and took a folded piece of paper out of his pocket. He had kept this address for 3 years, written in the shaky hand of a cellmate who had once worked in the information service. Alex Collins, 1247 East 5 Oaks, apartment 3B. His son. No, not his son. Not the monster his son had become. At the same time, in a small apartment in East Dayton, Alex Collins stood in front of the bathroom mirror, getting ready for work. At 24, she was a slender woman of average height, with shoulder-length brown hair and cautious brown eyes. Every morning began the same way. Shower, makeup, choosing an outfit, familiar rituals that helped her forget the body she was born with. The apartment was small, but cozy. Alex tried to create a space that reflected her true personality. Soft pastel colors, fresh flowers on the windowsill, psychology books on the shelves. Here she could be herself, not the boy her father saw her as, but the woman she had always felt herself to be. The phone rang, breaking the morning silence. The screen lit up with the number of a client, a middle-aged man who regularly booked her for business dinners. Alex didn't like this job, but it gave her independence and anonymity in a city where too many people knew her past as Alan Collins. Hi, Alex. I have a meeting with some partners from Chicago tonight. I think your presence would make a good impression. Of course, David. The Pine Club, 8 o'clock? That's right, and thank you, Alex. You always know how to behave. After the call, she put her phone away and thought about it. Compliments from clients were nice, but they couldn't fill the void left by her broken relationship with her family. She tried not to think about her dad, but sometimes memories broke through her carefully constructed defenses. Flashback. 3 years ago, the Collins family home in Huber Heights, a suburb of Dayton. You can't do this! You're my son, damn it! Frank Collins stood in the living room, his face red with rage, his fists clenched. 22-year-old Alex, then still Alan, sat on the couch, holding documents from the gender therapy clinic. He had been taking hormones for a year, and his body had begun to change. His features had softened. His breasts had begun to develop. Dad, please try to understand. I can't live as a man anymore. As a man? You are a man. You were born a man. I was born in a male body, but that doesn't mean I'm a man inside. Alex touched his hair, which now reached his shoulders. I've always known I was a girl, ever since I was a child. Frank moved closer, towering over his son. No one is going to turn Alan Collins into this parody of a woman. Do you hear me? No one. My name is Alex now. I've officially changed my documents. Your name is Alan. Alan Collins. Frank grabbed the documents and tore them to pieces. You're destroying our family. You're turning us into a laughingstock. Dad, stop! I just want to be myself. But Frank couldn't hear him anymore. Years of working at the aircraft factory, losing his job due to layoffs, problems with alcohol. It had all been building up inside him, and now it was coming out. The first blow landed in the solar plexus, the second in the face. Alex fell, trying to protect himself with his hands. Frank, stop! His mother screamed, trying to pull her husband away, but he was stronger. I'll fix you, he whispered, landing blow after blow. I'll beat the woman out of you. I'll make you a man again. The neighbors called the police. Alex spent 3 days in the hospital with a concussion and broken ribs. Frank got 3 years in prison for assault, causing serious bodily harm. Back in the present, Alex shuddered, chasing away the memories. She moved to Dayton right after the trial, changed her name and documents for good, and started a new life as a woman. Her mother called occasionally, but her relationship with her family was broken forever. The door to her apartment suddenly shook from heavy knocking. Alex froze. Who could be coming at this hour? Dayton police, please open the door. Through the peephole, she saw 2 uniformed officers. Her heart raced. The police had never meant anything good in her life, especially for a transgender woman working in the escort services industry. What's going on? She asked, opening the door on the chain. Miss Collins? My name is Officer Jenkins. We need to talk to you. Your father escaped from a prison transport a few hours ago. The world around Alex seemed to stop. Her father was free. The father who had sworn to fix her. The father who considered her transition a betrayal of everything he believed in. We don't believe you're in any immediate danger, the officer continued, but we feel it's necessary to warn you. You might want to stay with friends for a few days. Alex nodded, not trusting her voice. She had no close friends, no family who would accept her for who she was. All she had was this small apartment and the fragile life she had built piece by piece after her transition. We're patrolling the area, added the second officer. If you notice anything suspicious, call 911 immediately. When the police left, Alex locked the door and sat down on the sofa, wrapping her arms around her knees. For 3 years, she had lived with the belief that the worst was behind her. Now the past was returning to destroy her world once again. Her father, who had never accepted her true identity, was free and possibly looking for a way to finally solve the problem he considered her to be. Wednesday, October 16th, 2:30 p.m. The Royal Inn Motel on Dixie Drive was exactly the kind of place where no one asked any questions. The 2-story building with peeling paint and a neon sign with half the letters burned out attracted customers who valued anonymity more than comfort. Maggie O'Connor stood behind the front desk, counting the day's takings. At 35, she looked older than her age. Working night shifts and raising 2 children on her own had left their mark on her face. When a man with a bandage on his arm and abrasions on his face walked in, she wasn't surprised. Guests like him were not uncommon here. I need a room, Frank said, placing crumpled bills on the counter. For a few days. Maggie glanced at him quickly. Work clothes, rough hands, tired eyes. He looked like a man in trouble. Maybe a divorce, maybe debt problems. She had seen many like him. $40 a night, cash in advance. She handed him the key to a room on the 2nd floor. Ice and a vending machine are at the end of the hall. The maid comes on Tuesdays and Fridays. Frank took the key without looking at her. Thanks. And if anyone asks, you didn't see me. No one sees anyone here, Maggie replied with a tired smile. Those are the rules. In room 23, Frank locked the door and sat down on the creaky bed. The room was small and gloomy. Faded wallpaper, an 80s TV, the smell of cigarettes and cheap air freshener. But it was a hideout, and for now, that was enough. He took the folded piece of paper with the address out of his pocket and smoothed it out on the bedspread. 1247 East 5 Oaks, apartment 3B. Tomorrow he would go there and see how his former son was living. He would see what Alan had become. At the same time, at the Kettering Medical Center, Dr. James Rivera was finishing up with his patients. At 45, he was one of the few specialists in Dayton who worked with people experiencing gender dysphoria. His office was decorated in warm colors, with diplomas on the walls and family photos on his desk. When there was a knock at the door, he looked up from the medical charts. "Dr. Rivera? Sorry to bother you." Alex entered the office looking agitated. "I know I don't have an appointment, but..." "Alex, what's wrong?" James put down his pen and looked at her intently. In 2 years of therapy, he had learned to read her emotional state. Right now, she was scared. "My father escaped from prison. The police came yesterday to warn me." Dr. Rivera frowned. He remembered Alex's story, the brutal beatings from her own father, the hospitalization, the trial. "Sit down. Tell me exactly what the police said." Alex sank into the familiar chair across from his desk. "They said he escaped from the convoy yesterday morning. They warned me I should stay with friends." She smiled bitterly. "What friends, doctor? I don't have any close friends." "What about your clients? Maybe one of them?" "No." Alex shook her head. "It's just work, nothing more. I keep my distance." Dr. Rivera nodded understandingly. In their previous sessions, they had talked a lot about how difficult it was for Alex to build trusting relationships after being cut off from her family. Working as an escort gave her financial independence, but reinforced her isolation. "Alex, are you afraid he'll find you?" "I know he'll find me." Her voice trembled. "He never accepted my transition. To him, I'm still Alan, his son who brought shame on the family. He swore he'd fix me." "Tell me about your fears. What exactly are you afraid of?" Alex fell silent, gathering her thoughts. "He thinks that if he beats me enough, he can get his son back, that the woman in me is a disease that can be cured with force. And what do you feel? Anger, fear, and guilt." The last word was almost a whisper. "Sometimes I think that if I hadn't started transitioning, my family would still be together. My mom wouldn't be alone, and my dad wouldn't be in prison." "Alex, look at me." Dr. Rivera leaned forward. "You are not to blame for your father's reaction. His inability to accept your true identity is his problem, not yours. But I destroyed my family." "No, you became yourself. The family fell apart because of hatred and intolerance." Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Mitchell was studying Frank Collins's file in her office. She spread out photos, reports, and witness statements from the trial 3 years ago on her desk. Frank Collins, born in 1971 in Dayton. Father of 4 children, Alex is the youngest. He worked as a mechanic at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for 20 years until he was laid off in 2018. After that, he had a series of temporary jobs, problems with alcohol, and growing aggression at home. The turning point came in 2021 when 22-year-old Alan announced to his family that he wanted to change his gender and start living as a woman. According to his mother, Frank took this as a personal insult and betrayal. He said he would rather kill his son than let him become a woman. Sarah read Dorothy Collins's testimony. He forbade him from taking hormones and threatened to kick him out of the house. The conflict reached its peak in October 2021. Alan officially changed his name to Alex and announced the start of hormone therapy. That same evening, Frank beat his son so badly that he had to be hospitalized. Sarah obtained the medical reports. Concussion, 3 broken ribs, multiple bruises on the face and body. The doctors noted that the beating was particularly brutal. The blows were intended to cause maximum pain. The phone interrupted her thoughts. Mitchell speaking. "Detective, this is Officer Jenkins. We checked Collins's known addresses. The house in Huber Heights is empty. His wife left for her sisters in Columbus right after she heard about his escape. The neighbors say they haven't seen anyone." "What about work contacts?" "Most of his former colleagues either don't keep in touch with him or have also lost their jobs. We're checking the bars he used to frequent." "Okay. What about surveillance on his daughter?" "A patrol car drives by her house every 2 hours. but we don't have the resources for constant security." Sarah frowned. It was standard procedure for domestic violence cases, but she felt it wasn't enough. Frank Collins wasn't just an escaped convict. He was a father obsessed with fixing his child. That evening, Alex was getting ready for a meeting with a client. The Pine Club restaurant was one of Daytona's finest establishments, a place where business people held important negotiations. She chose an elegant black dress and minimal makeup. The look had to be sophisticated but not provocative. Before leaving, she checked the locks one more time and looked out the window. The street looked normal, parked cars, a few pedestrians, streetlights. But now every shadow seemed suspicious. David Harrison, a 48-year-old construction company manager, was already waiting for her at the restaurant. He was one of her regular clients, polite, generous, never crossing the line. To him, she was just a beautiful companion for business events. "Alex, you look beautiful," he said, standing up to pull out her chair. "Thank you for agreeing to come on such short notice." "You're welcome, David. Who are our guests today?" "Investors from Chicago. They're considering financing a new residential complex in the suburbs." He smiled. "Your presence will add sophistication to the meeting." Alex nodded, slipping into the role of the sophisticated companion of a successful businessman. It was a game she had mastered in her 3 years on the job, being exactly what the client needed at that moment. But even as she engaged in small talk with the investors, she couldn't completely relax. Her gaze kept drifting to the restaurant windows, to the entrance, to the unfamiliar faces at the neighboring tables. Somewhere in the city, the man who had once almost killed her for daring to be herself was looking for her. At the same time, Frank was studying the East Dayton area. He walked through East Five Oaks several times, memorizing the location of buildings, store hours, and patrol car routes. The house at 1247 turned out to be a 3-story brick building with an external fire escape. Apartment 3B was on the 2nd floor, with windows facing the street. It was the perfect place to watch. He found a bench in a small park across the street and sat down, covering himself with a newspaper. From here, he could see all the entrances and exits of the building. All he had to do was wait. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, he saw a familiar figure coming out of the entrance. Tall, slender, wearing a black dress, long brown hair, graceful gait. If he hadn't known the truth, he would never have thought it was his son. Alan. No, now she called herself Alex. Frank clenched his fists as he watched his former son get into a taxi. 3 years of hormone therapy had turned the boy he had raised into this parody of a woman. But beneath the makeup and women's clothes, there was still Alan, his blood, his air, his responsibility. He watched the taxi disappear around the corner, then stood up and walked back to the motel. Tomorrow he would return and continue watching. He would study her habits, find her weaknesses, and choose the right moment. Returning to the motel late that evening, Frank found Maggie still on duty at the front desk. She looked up from her magazine as he walked by. "How's it going? Find what you were looking for?" Frank stopped. "What am I looking for?" "I don't know, but men don't book rooms in places like this just to relax." She looked at him intently. "You look like a man with unfinished business." "Maybe." "Listen," Maggie put down the magazine. "I don't get involved in other people's business, but if you're planning something that could hurt my children or my business—" "Children?" Frank was suddenly interested. "How many do you have?" "2, a 7-year-old girl and a 4-year-old boy." Her voice sounded proud. "I'm raising them on my own after my divorce. That must be difficult." "It is difficult, but they are my reason for living. I will do anything to protect them." Frank nodded understandingly. "I had 4 children too. The youngest—" He paused. "The youngest disappointed me." "Disappointed you? How?" "He chose the wrong path. He didn't become who he was supposed to be." Maggie frowned. There was something disturbing about the guest's words. "What are you going to do about it?" "Fix my mistake." Thursday, October 17th, 7:20 a.m. Alex woke up from a nightmare in which her father was beating her again, demanding that she give him back his son. The sheets were damp with sweat, and her heart was beating so loudly that she thought the neighbors could hear it. She sat up in bed, hugging her knees, and tried to calm her breathing. Outside, Dayton was waking up. The sounds of morning traffic, dogs barking, people rushing to work. Life went on as usual, but for Alex, everything had changed the moment the police reported her father's escape. She went to the window and peeked cautiously around the edge of the curtain. The street looked peaceful, a few parked cars, a woman with a stroller, an old man walking his dog. But now every stranger could be her father or his accomplice. The phone rang, making her jump. The screen lit up with the number of a client, Michael Stevens, a lawyer who regularly requested an escort for social events. "Hi, Alex. I hope I didn't wake you." "No, I'm already awake. What's up?" "I have a charity event at the Crown Plaza Hotel tonight. My wife is sick and I don't want to go alone. Can you keep me company?" Alex hesitated. On the one hand, she needed the money. On the other hand, attending public events seemed dangerous right now. "How many people will be at the event?" "About 200. The city's business elite, politicians, public figures, very respectable company." Perhaps the crowd would be a good cover. Her father would hardly dare to do anything in front of so many witnesses. "Okay, what time?" "Let's meet in the hotel lobby at 7. At the same time, Frank was sitting in a cafe across from Alex's house, watching her windows. He ordered coffee and cake, spread a newspaper in front of him, pretending to be a regular customer. In 2 days of observation, he had studied her routine. She usually left around 9 in the morning, returned for lunch, and left again for work in the evening. Today was different. The lights were on, but she didn't appear. Frank checked his watch. It was already 8:30. "More coffee?" The waitress smiled at him. "Yes, please." He held out his empty cup, his eyes fixed on the windows. "Tell me, what's that building across the street? It looks like nice apartments." "Oh yes, that's one of the best buildings in the neighborhood. It's mostly young professionals and medical students. It's a quiet place. Do you know any of the residents?" The waitress shrugged. "I've seen some of them. There's a girl on the second floor, very pretty, elegant. They say she works in the service industry." Frank clenched his teeth. "The service industry?" "Well, you know, escort services for business people. Nothing like that. Just company for events." Prostitution. His son had become a prostitute. Frank felt a familiar rage rising inside him. It wasn't enough to ruin his body with hormones. Alan was selling himself to men. At 9 in the morning, Alex finally appeared in the doorway. She was dressed simply. Jeans, a sweater, sneakers. Her hair was tied back in a ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. If you didn't know the truth, you could mistake her for a normal young woman. Frank left the money on the table and followed her at a distance. Alex walked to the bus stop and got on the bus heading downtown. Frank quickly hailed a taxi. "Follow that bus, but not too closely." The driver, an elderly man with a gray mustache, looked in the rearview mirror. "Problems with your wife?" "Something like that." "I understand. I've been through that myself. The main thing is not to do anything stupid." Alex got out at the Kettering Medical Center and walked to the entrance, not noticing the taxi that had stopped half a block from the hospital. She had an unscheduled appointment with Dr. Rivera. Her anxiety was growing by the hour, and she needed professional help. In the therapist's office, she told him about her nightmares, her paranoid thoughts, her fear of leaving the house. "Alex, this is a natural reaction to a threat," Dr. Rivera said, making notes in his notebook. "Your body is in a state of constant combat readiness." I thought I had dealt with the past. 3 years of therapy, a new life, a new identity. Trauma doesn't disappear without a trace, especially when the threat is real. He looked at her intently. "Tell me about your fears. What specifically scares you the most?" "That he'll find me at work. That he'll make a scene in front of my clients. That he'll finish what he started 3 years ago." She faltered. "That he'll finish what he started 3 years ago. You think he might kill you?" "I think it would be easier for him to have a dead son than a transgender daughter." Dr. Rivera frowned. "Alex, I want you to seriously consider leaving town for a while. Do you have the means to leave?" "Where would I go? I don't have the money for a fresh start. I don't have any connections in other cities. This job, this apartment, it's all I have." "What about the police? They're doing what they can. but they don't have the resources for round-the-clock security. The patrol car drives by twice a day. That's it. Outside the medical center, Frank waited in a taxi. When Alex emerged from the building an hour later, he noticed that she looked even more distraught than she had that morning. "Should we continue surveillance?" asked the driver. "Yes, but be careful." This time, Alex drove to the Dayton Mall. Frank followed her inside, keeping his distance. She went into several clothing stores, bought some cosmetics, and sat in a cafe with a book. Watching her, Frank tried to figure out where his son was in this woman. Her mannerisms, her gestures, even her voice were all feminine. But sometimes, when she was lost in thought, familiar features would show in her profile. The line of her jaw, the shape of her eyes, the way she furrowed her brow. Alan was still there, beneath a layer of hormones and pretense. Detective Sarah Mitchell spent the morning checking possible hideouts for Frank Collins. The list included cheap motels, flop houses, and the homes of friends and relatives. So far, all checks had been unsuccessful. "Detective," Sergeant Riley entered the office with new documents. "We got the surveillance footage from the escape site. Maybe we'll find something." Sarah turned on her computer and began reviewing the footage. The quality wasn't great, but in one of the frames, she saw the figure of a man walking away from the accident site. His height and build matched Frank's description. "Are there any camera recordings along his route?" "We're checking, but he had enough time to disappear into the crowd." Sarah studied a map of Dayton, marking possible routes. If Frank really planned to find his daughter, he had to stay in the city. The question was where exactly. Her thoughts were interrupted by the phone. "Detective Mitchell? This is Dr. Rivera from Kettering Medical Center. We were talking about my patient, Alex Collins." "Yes, doctor, what's happened?" "She was with me this morning. Her condition is deteriorating. Nightmares, paranoia, panic attacks. I'm seriously concerned for her safety. We're doing everything we can." "Detective, that's not enough. Her father isn't just an escaped convict. He's a man obsessed with fixing his daughter. He may resort to extreme measures." Sarah made a note in her notebook. "What do you recommend?" "Constant security or a temporary move to a safe location. Alex has a work meeting at the Crown Plaza Hotel tonight, a large event with lots of people. This may be a good opportunity for covert surveillance." "Thank you for the information, doctor. We will take your recommendations into consideration." That evening at the Royal Inn Motel, Maggie O'Connor was cleaning the lobby when she noticed that the guest from room 23 had returned with a grim expression on his face. She hadn't seen him smile once in 3 days. "How's it going?" she asked as he passed the front desk. Frank stopped. "Fine. Did you find what you were looking for?" "Not everything." Maggie put down the rag. Something in his tone alarmed her. "Listen, I don't want to get involved, but you look like a man who's getting ready for something serious." Frank looked at her closely. "You look like a woman who's seen a lot in her life. Enough to recognize trouble. I have 2 children, and I don't want my motel associated with anything bad." "Are your children good children? The best in the world? What if one of them goes down the wrong path, becomes someone they're not supposed to be?" Maggie frowned. "Children have the right to choose their own lives. Even if their choices destroy the family? It's not the children's choices that destroy a family, it's the parents' inability to accept them." Frank turned sharply toward her. "You don't understand. My son has twisted himself into a parody of a woman. He sells his body to men. And what are you going to do about it? Stop this madness." Maggie felt a chill in her stomach. "How exactly?" "Any way I can." When Frank went to his room, Maggie took out her cell phone. She stared at the keypad for a long time, struggling with her doubts. Finally, she dialed the police. "Hello, I want to report a suspicious guest." At the Crown Plaza Hotel, a charity event was in full swing. About 200 people had gathered in the large hall. Business people, politicians, and Daytona socialites. Alex arrived in an elegant dark blue dress. Her client, Michael Stevens, introduced her as a public relations consultant. "Alex is helping me with some projects," he explained to his partners. "She's a very talented young woman." Alex smiled and made small talk, but inside she was tense. Every time someone approached her from behind or looked at her too intently, her heart began to beat faster. In the middle of the evening, she excused herself and went to the ladies' room. Standing in front of the mirror, she tried to calm down. Here, among the cream of Dayton society, she was safe. Her father wouldn't dare do anything in public. As she left the restroom, she bumped into a middle-aged man in a cheap suit. He clearly didn't fit in with the atmosphere of the event. "Excuse me," he muttered, but his gaze lingered on her face for too long. Alex quickly walked past him, but felt his eyes follow her. Returning to the hall, she approached Michael. "I need to leave." "What's wrong? You look pale." "Just tired. Can you call me a taxi?" Outside the hotel in a rented car, Frank watched the entrance. He had seen Alex arrive with a client and walk into the hall. Now he waited for her to come out. His cell phone rang. "Frank Collins? Who is this?" "Detective Mitchell, Dayton Police. We need to talk." Frank looked around. There were no police cars in sight. "Talk about what?" "About why you ran away. About your plans for your daughter." "I don't have a daughter." "Frank, we know you're in town. We know you're watching Alex. Turn yourself in before it's too late." It was too late 3 years ago. He turned off the phone and threw it out the window. At that moment, Alex came out of the hotel. She was standing at the entrance waiting for a taxi. Frank started the engine. Thursday, October 17th, 10:45 p.m. The taxi stopped at 1247 East 5th Avenue. Alex paid the driver and stepped out onto the deserted street. Streetlights cast circles of yellow light on the wet asphalt. A light autumn rain was beginning to fall. She quickly walked to the entrance, took out her keys, and looked back. The street seemed deserted, but she had felt uneasy ever since she noticed the strange man at the hotel. Maybe it was paranoia, but it was better to be safe than sorry. Half a block from the house, Frank turned off the engine of his rental car and watched. He saw Alex enter the building and the light come on in the second-floor apartment 3B. Now he knew for sure. She was home and alone. He took gloves out of the glove compartment and put them on. There was a knife in his jacket pocket, just in case. But Frank hoped he wouldn't have to use it. He just wanted to talk to his son, to explain to him that this madness had to end. In her apartment, Alex took off her shoes and changed into comfortable clothes, soft pants and a t-shirt. The evening at the hotel had worn her out emotionally. The constant tension, the need to smile and keep up the conversation when everything inside her was clenched with fear. She made some tea and sat down by the window with a book, but she couldn't concentrate on reading. Her thoughts kept returning to her father. Where was he now? What was he planning? Did he know where she lived? The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her alert. Usually the neighbors were already asleep at this hour. She went to the door and peeked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. Frank stood at the service entrance to the building, studying the lock. The old apartment building was not particularly secure, just a simple mortise lock that could be picked with a few tools. He took a screwdriver out of his pocket and set to work. 5 minutes later, the lock gave way. Frank carefully opened the door and stepped into the dark hallway on the first floor. The building was old and the wooden floors creaked under his feet. He froze, listening, but there was no sound. The stairs to the second floor were at the end of the hallway. Frank slowly climbed the stairs, trying not to step on the creaky steps. There were 4 apartments on the second floor. 3B was the third on the left. He approached the door and listened. There were quiet sounds coming from inside. Footsteps, the clinking of dishes, a television playing. Alan was home. Alex was washing a cup in the kitchen when she heard a soft rattle in the front door lock. She froze, straining her ears. The sound repeated itself. Someone was trying to pick the lock. Her heart was beating so loudly that it rang in her ears. She moved silently to the door and peered through the peephole. The hallway was dark, but she could make out the silhouette of a man leaning over the keyhole. The phone. She had to call the police. Alex reached for her cell phone on the coffee table, but at that moment, the lock clicked and the door slowly opened. A familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Broad shoulders, graying hair, cold gray eyes. 3 years in prison had changed Frank. He looked thinner and harder, but Alex would have recognized him in 1,000. "Hi, Alan," he said quietly, entering the apartment and locking the door behind him. Time seemed to stand still. Alex stood in the middle of the living room, unable to move. The nightmare that had haunted her for 3 years had become reality. Her father had found her. "My name is Alex," she whispered, finding the strength to speak. "Your name is Alan. Alan Collins, my son." Frank slowly approached her, studying her with his eyes. "Look what you've turned yourself into. I've become myself, who I was always meant to be. You've become a freak." Frank's voice rose, but he quickly regained control. "Long hair, makeup, women's clothes, and that job. You sell yourself to men like a cheap whore." "That's not true. I'm an escort for business events. Don't lie to me." Frank took another step forward. "I know what you do. You've disgraced our name, destroyed our family. Your mother still cries at night." Alex backed away toward the window. "Mom isn't crying because of me. She's crying because of you, because of what you did. I was trying to save you, to knock some sense into you. You tried to kill me." "Maybe I should have finished the job." Frank stopped a meter away from her. "Maybe then I'd still have a son instead of this joke." In the apartment next door, Robert Chen, a 34-year-old programmer, was working at his computer when he heard muffled voices coming from apartment 3B. Alex was usually a quiet neighbor, but now someone was talking loudly in her apartment. He listened more closely. The man's voice sounded aggressive, the woman's frightened. Robert frowned. Maybe he should check to see if everything was okay. The confrontation continued in the apartment. Alex pressed her back against the wall by the window. Frank stood in front of her, blocking her way to the exit. "Listen to me carefully," he said, trying to sound calm. "I spent 3 years in prison thinking about you, about how to fix what you did to yourself. I don't need to be fixed." "You do!" He slammed his fist against the wall next to her head. "You're my son, my blood. I won't let you go on living this lie." "It's not a lie, it's my truth." "Your truth?" Frank grabbed her by the shoulders. "Your truth is that you were born a boy, that you have a father who loves you. If you love me, then accept me for who I am, for who you are. You're a man, Alan, and I'll make you remember that." Robert Chen got up from his computer and walked over to the wall separating the apartments. The voices were getting louder, and now he could clearly hear signs of an argument. The woman was clearly frightened. He put on his slippers and went out into the hallway. It was quiet at door 3B, but a few seconds later there was a loud thud, as if someone had fallen. Robert knocked on the door. "Alex, are you okay?" Sounds of a struggle and muffled cries came from inside. Robert tried to open the door, but it was locked. "I'm calling the police!" he shouted and rushed back to his phone. Inside the apartment, Frank pushed Alex and she fell onto the sofa. When the neighbor knocked on the door, Frank froze. "What did you tell him?" he hissed. "Nothing. Robert is just a good man. A good man wouldn't cover for a pervert." Alex tried to get up, but Frank loomed over her. "Dad, please. I don't want to fight with you. And I don't want to kill you, but if you don't go back to your normal life, I can't go back to who I never was." Frank grabbed her by the throat. "You can, and you will." Alex tried to push his hands away, but her father was stronger. His fingers tightened around her neck, cutting off her breath. "I can't!" she croaked. "Tell me you're my son! Tell me you'll go back to your normal life!" Instead of answering, Alex tried to knee him in the groin. The blow was weak, but Frank staggered back, loosening his grip. She gasped for air and tried to stand up. "Bitch!" Frank grabbed her hair and yanked her back. "You don't want to do this the easy way, do you?" Robert dialed 911, his hands shaking as he held the phone. 911, what's happening? "There's an assault in progress. 1247 East 5 Oaks, apartment 3B. A man is attacking a woman. They're fighting. A patrol car is on its way. Stay on the line and don't get involved." "It's very loud. I think he's choking her." "Sir, the patrol will be there in 3 minutes. Please stay safe." Robert couldn't stand by and do nothing. He went out into the hallway and tried again to open the door to 3B. It was locked. Then he started banging loudly and shouting, "The police are on their way! Leave her alone!" Frank heard his neighbor's screams and realized that time was running out. He pinned Alex to the floor, wrapping his elbow around her neck. "Last chance, Alan. Tell her you're my son." Alex scratched his hands, trying to break free. "I'm your daughter," she managed to say. "No!" Frank tightened his grip. I don't have a daughter. I have a son who is sick and needs treatment. It's not an illness. Alex's voice grew weaker. It's an illness, and if you can't be cured, then you'd better die. Alex tried to reach the coffee table where the phone was lying, but her hands wouldn't obey her. Darkness was closing in at the edges of her vision. I'm sorry, son, Frank whispered, not loosening his grip. But I can't let you live this lie. Robert heard the apartment go quiet. Too quiet. He ran back to his door, grabbed a heavy ceramic vase, and threw it with all his might at the door of 3B. The wood cracked, but the door held. Robert grabbed a chair and began to ram the lock. After the third blow, the door flew open. Two people were lying on the living room floor. A middle-aged man was holding a woman in a headlock. She wasn't moving. Let her go, Robert shouted. Frank raised his head. His face was red with tension, his eyes wild. Get out, this is a family matter. You're killing her! Robert lunged forward, but Frank pushed him away with one hand, still holding Alex. She's not her. It's my son who's gone mad. Robert tried to pull him away from Alex, but at that moment, sirens could be heard in the distance. The police had arrived. Frank heard the sirens and knew it was over. He looked at Alex's face, pale and motionless. Her eyes were closed and she wasn't breathing. What have you done? Robert whispered, sinking down next to the body. Frank let go of his daughter and slowly stood up. I freed my son. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs grew louder. A few seconds later, police officers burst through the broken door. Police! Hands up! Frank raised his hands without resistance. He looked at the body on the floor and felt peace for the first time in many years. The nightmare was over. Alan was no longer suffering. Is there a pulse? One of the officers leaned over Alex, feeling his neck. Barely. Call an ambulance. But Frank knew the truth. He had held on too long. His daughter was dead. Robert Chen stood in the corner of the room, shaking from shock. The police handcuffed Frank and led him out of the apartment. Paramedics arrived a few minutes later and began resuscitation attempts, but it was too late. Alex Collins, 24, was pronounced dead at 11:17 p.m. The last words she uttered were, "I'm your daughter." But Frank never heard them. To him, Alex was still Alan, the sick son he had cured in the only way he knew how. When Detective Sarah Mitchell arrived at the scene half an hour later, forensic technicians were already working on the evidence. The body was covered with a sheet, and Robert Chen was being questioned by another detective. What do we have? She asked Sergeant Riley. Frank Collins strangled his daughter in her apartment. A neighbor called the police and tried to intervene, but it was too late. Sarah looked at the sheet covering the young woman's body. Another victim of hatred and misunderstanding. Another tragedy that could have been prevented. Where's Collins? In a holding cell. He didn't resist arrest, but he's refusing to talk without a lawyer. What did he say at the scene? Riley checked the records. Quote, I freed my son from his illness. He still refers to the victim by a male name. Sarah closed her eyes. 20 years on the force, and she still couldn't understand how a parent's love could turn into such hatred. Friday, October 18th, 8 a.m. The holding cell at the Montgomery County Correctional Center. Frank Collins sat on a thin mattress, his head in his hands. His wrists were red and raw from handcuffs, and his left eye was swollen from trying to fight back when he was processed in the receiving area. The duty officer, a heavy-set man in his 50s, opened the cell door with a creak. Collins, your lawyer is here. Waiting for him in the cramped meeting room was Jason Wheeler, a 32-year-old public defender with a case file under his arm. His suit was stained with coffee, his eyes tired from working on hopeless cases. Mr. Collins, I'm Jason Wheeler, your court-appointed defense attorney. We don't have much time, so let's get right to it. Frank raised his head. His eyes were red, but his gaze was steady. How much time am I looking at? For first-degree murder? Life in prison or the death penalty if the prosecutor decides to seek the maximum penalty? What if I say he was sick? Wheeler sighed. Another one. Mr. Collins, the victim was your daughter. She was an adult, living on her own. I didn't have a daughter, Frank interrupted. I had a son, Alan. He was sick, thought he was a woman. The lawyer made a note. Possible insanity. Okay, tell me what happened yesterday. I went to his house to talk to him. I wanted to convince him to stop these games, but he refused to listen. And then what? Frank fell silent, staring at the table. I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted him to understand. That same day, Detective Mitchell was questioning Robert Chen at the station. The programmer looked exhausted. He hadn't slept a wink after what he had seen. I heard screaming for about 15 minutes before I decided to do something, he admitted guiltily. I thought maybe it was a domestic dispute. None of my business. What made you intervene? The woman was screaming, I can't breathe. And the man was saying something about son and illness. It was clear that something serious was going on. Sarah took notes. Describe what you saw when you broke in. He was holding her down on the floor with his arm around her neck. I don't know how to describe his face. He looked focused, like he was doing a job. Robert shuddered, and she wasn't moving. Did he say anything? When I shouted to let her go, he replied, "It's not her, it's my sick son." Even after she was dead, he called her by a man's name. At the county morgue, medical examiner Dr. Anna Hughes was finishing the autopsy. Alex lay on a metal table under bright lights, and even death couldn't completely erase the traces of beauty from her face. Classic case of strangulation, Dr. Hughes explained to Detective Mitchell over the phone. The hyoid bone is broken, multiple petechial hemorrhages. Under the victim's fingernails is skin and blood from the attacker. Any signs of sexual assault? No. This was a clean kill. No sexual motive. How long did she suffer? Pause. Judging by the nature of the injuries, the attacker loosened his grip several times, then tightened it again. She was conscious for about 3 to 4 minutes. Sarah closed her eyes. 3 minutes of agony, during which her father could have changed his mind dozens of times. In Dr. Rivera's office, the detective studied Alex's medical records. The file was thick, 2 years of regular therapy. She was afraid of this exact scenario, the psychologist said. In her last sessions, she said she felt like a hunted animal. Working at an escort agency wasn't her choice. She just didn't have any other options. Why not? Her resume had the name Alex, but her diploma had a male name. Employers asked uncomfortable questions. It was easier to work where they didn't require documents. What about her family? A disaster. Her mother tried to stay in touch, but refused to use her female name. Her father wrote her threatening letters from prison. Alex showed me some of them. Dr. Rivera took a folder out of the safe. Here's the latest. It arrived a month ago. Sarah read the uneven lines. Alan, when I get out, I'm going to fix what you've done to yourself. You're my son, and I won't let you live in this filth. A week later, prosecutor Jennifer Smith met with the victim's family. Dorothy Collins arrived from Columbus, a broken woman in a cheap black suit. Mrs. Collins, are you prepared to testify against your husband? Dorothy was silent for a long time, fingering her handkerchief. I knew he would do it. I knew it for 3 years. Why didn't you go to the police? I did. After every letter he sent from prison, I called the station. They told me the letters weren't a direct threat, that there was nothing they could do. The prosecutor frowned. Do you have copies of those reports? Somewhere at home. But what difference does it make? Alex is dead anyway. Tell me about your relationship with your daughter. I had a good relationship with Alan. I tried with Alex, but I didn't understand her. The sex change, the hormones, the operations. It was all too strange for me. Dorothy began to cry. Maybe if I had been more supportive? It's not your fault. No, it is. I chose my husband over my child. And now I have neither. Maggie O'Connor was giving her statement to the prosecutor, nervously chain-smoking cigarettes. He paid for the room in cash, no ID, she said. That's normal for our clients, but there was something about him that made me nervous. What exactly? He left every morning and came back angry. He muttered something about his sick son and women's nonsense. And on his last day, he said he was going to sort out a family problem. Why didn't you call the police earlier? Maggie stubbed out her cigarette. Listen, I run a cheap motel. Half my guests are people with problems. If I call the police on every one of them, I'll be out of business in a week. What was different that evening? He came back and said, tomorrow I'll fix my mistake once and for all. and he looked at the photos of my children on the counter. That's when I knew it was serious. The trial began in January. The courtroom was packed. The case had attracted the attention of LGBT activists and religious groups. Frank sat next to his lawyer, dressed in a prison uniform, listening indifferently to the charges. Prosecutor Smith presented the case methodically. Evidence, witness testimony, expert reports. The defense tried to prove insanity, but the psychiatric evaluation was unequivocal. The defendant was sane and in control of his actions. The most difficult moment came with Robert Chen's testimony. When I broke into the apartment, he said to me, "This is a family matter." He continued to hold her even after it was clear that she was dead. What else did he say? "Now my son is free from his illness," as if he had done her a favor. Dorothea Collins testified with a trembling voice. Frank never accepted Alex. He said it was a temporary phase that could be fixed. When therapy didn't help, he started talking about other methods. What methods? Beating her. He said that if you hit him right, you could have beat the nonsense out of his head. Frank raised his head for the first time during the trial. "She was my son. I was trying to save him." The judge banged his gavel. "Defendant, order in the court. Sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Frank listened without emotion, only asking the guards, "When will I be transferred to a permanent prison?" After the trial, Detective Mitchell was smoking outside the courthouse when Dr. Rivera approached her. "Justice?" he asked. "The killer is behind bars. He won't kill anyone else." "What about preventing this from happening in the future?" Sarah stubbed out her cigarette. "That's not our job. We investigate crimes. We don't prevent social problems." "That's a shame, because there are thousands of families like the Collinses in this country." 2 years later, Frank Collins is serving his sentence at Marion Prison. He has joined a Christian prison ministry and considers himself a martyr for defending traditional values. In letters to his wife, he writes that he did the right thing. Dorothy divorced her husband and moved to Florida to live with her sister. She is in therapy, trying to cope with her guilt. She sometimes visits her daughter's grave in Daytona. Robert Chen moved to Columbus after he couldn't sleep in his apartment because he heard his neighbor's death cries. He donated money to create a crisis center for LGBT youth. Maggie O'Connor sold her motel and opened a small cafe. She no longer rents out room 23 where Frank used to stay, saying that it has bad energy. Dr. Rivera continues to work with transgender patients. On the wall of his office is a plaque with the name Alex Collins. He tells new patients her story as a warning about the importance of family support.